Hello, AP Statistics. It is time for your very first teaching video. I know you're so excited. So I just want to give you a disclaimer before you start going through these notes. They are in different placement a little bit from yours. They're in the same order, but because I added typing, the spacing has just changed a little bit. So don't have a freak out attack. Okay, so hopefully as you were taking your notes, you were actually paying attention and reading through them. That is what I want you to do. I want you to be an active note taker. So as we get started here, when we're talking about statistics, I mean, I've stressed this already in our WebEx times. I've talked to you about the idea of statistics being founded in data. We talk about data, we organize data, we arrange it, we graph it, we analyze it. That's what we do in statistics. So I cannot emphasize this enough. In this class, your vocabulary is going to be key. You're going to learn a lot of words that you already know probably, but may have a little bit different meaning. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is this idea of variables. These are just our categories, characteristics, whatever we're talking about. We'll be talking about variables pretty much all year. Remember that we took a survey and you got to be part of the data that I collected. So when we collected that information, the variables were all the things I asked, like gender, height, how fast have you ever driven, what color's your car, all of those kinds of things are these variables that we're talking about. So when we know what a variable is, okay, we have to establish its context. Otherwise, the information that we gathered on the survey doesn't mean anything. For instance, if I were to give you the spreadsheet and there weren't any headers, it would just be a bunch of hooey. Okay, it wouldn't make any sense to you. So you need to always find out what your context is. Now, of course, if you've taken an English class, which you all have, you know the who, the where, the who, the when, the what, the why, all of that fun stuff. You don't need all of those, but you do have to have some kind of context for your variables and for your information. Otherwise, the data you collect doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. If I just throw some test grades at you and say, look, some numbers, you're like, oh, neat, teacher. Anyway, so we have to have context. Once we establish where our data is coming from, the very next thing we're going to do is get a visual representation of that data. We are going to graph it. I know, it's a magical time. So graphing is amazing, all right, and it's really not very difficult. I've already showed you a little bit of graphing when we graphed our dot plot for that Parkinson's activity. So what we are going to do, I'm going to show you some graphs here in just a minute. There are different kinds of graphs based on the kind of data you have. So just make sure that you're not just slapping something down on the paper. Please try to make it look a little decent, all right, and pay attention to a title. Make sure you're labeling your axes. Make sure you're including units of measure where applicable. And don't forget that if you're dealing with quantitative data, which we'll get into this in more detail later, you have to make sure you're going to label your x-axis consistently and reasonably. What I mean by that is, let's say you've got this down here and you're telling me that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think not. Okay, because this distance is way bigger than this one. That's what I'm talking about by be consistent and reasonable. Okay, so let's jump right into this highlighting. Oh, that means it's real important. Okay, kids, anytime you see yellow highlighting in these, please pay attention. I cannot stress this enough. So we have two types of data that we're going to focus on in this unit. And actually, these are going to come up throughout the year. So it is very important that you understand the difference between them. Categorical versus quantitative. Wow. my speech is just off the hook today. Categorical means that you just fit into a category. You could probably easily go through our list, our spreadsheet information about our survey, and pick out which ones are categories. All right. Categories are anything that aren't really measurable mathematically. So, for instance, your gender, anything having to do with your favorite color, your favorite music, your favorite sport to watch on TV, all of those things are categorical. These aren't necessarily non-numeric. So, you have to be very careful. It can get a little confusing thinking about that, because there are numerical datum that is categorical. Things like your zip code, your area code, your social security number. And if it's numeric and you can't tell, ask yourself this question, does it make sense to take an average of these numbers? What's the average social security number? Well, that's silly. That doesn't make any sense. So that's how you can tell that numeric data is categorical. Okay, so moving on to quantitative data. And quantitative data is what we will place the most emphasis and focus on, because it gives us the most information and the most, what's the word I'm thinking of? We can do more with it. That's pretty much it. So your quantitative variables are always numeric. There's no question there. So anytime we're dealing with quantitative data, there are certain graph types that we use, and anytime we're dealing with categorical data, there are certain graph types we use. And I will illustrate some of these to you in the following examples. Enjoy!